My name is Gary Hauck, and I'm sharing with you a recent trip that my son Jared, here he is, and I co-hosted to Central and Eastern Europe with several good friends and colleagues. We toured Hungary, Slovakia, Austria, the Czech Republic, Germany, and Poland. We started here in Budapest, Hungary, at the largest Jewish synagogue in Europe and the second largest in all the world, and a brief stop at Heroes Square, also called Millennium Square or Millennium Square.
The other name, Millennium Square. It means you can see the statues of famous heroes, kings and political leaders, and the 7 Hungarian tribes leaders on this square. That's why I got the name Hero Square. Everything made by Hungarian artists.
Budapest is comprised of 2 cities, Buda and Pest, or Pest, that unified in 1872. Buda was named after Attila the Hun's brother, as the Huns were the early settlers of Hungary, later the land of the Magyars. This neo-Gothic parliament building on the Buda side of the Blue Danube is of course the showpiece of Hungary's culture. On the Pest side is the Matthias Church, or Church of Coronation, on Castle Hill at Fisherman's Bastion, named after one of Hungary's earliest kings in the 15th century. But next to us stands one of the statues of Saint Stephen, Hungary's first Christian king, crowned on Christmas Day in the year 1000. From there we went to St. Stephen's Basilica at the center and heart of the city. While a bit less sublime, we also made it a point to enjoy the famous thermal bath in Budapest, known as the Széchenyi Spa, one of the hottest in Europe at 104 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Of course, on this day, it happened to be 105 degrees outside. We did try out the cooler indoor pools as well, but the outdoor roundabout was certainly my favorite. What a fun experience. Our restaurants were also a cultural experience and often included some live music by local talent, like we're hearing here. And yes, we did do a lovely sunset cruise on the Blue Danube. This whole area was founded in 896, and we saw some buildings that spanned many centuries. However, in 1896, a new millennium was celebrated with many new wonderful structures. The Parliament, with a neo-Gothic style and neo-Renaissance dome, was certainly the most important. It's considered by many as the most beautiful building in all of Europe. As we cruised south on the Danube, we had Buda to our left and Pest on our right, with Castle Hill, Liberation Monument, Memorial to St. Gerard, and a wide variety of beautiful buildings to enjoy.
This is beautiful Bratislava in Slovakia. Okay, I just climbed the bell tower and I'm up on top of the bell tower in Bratislava. I can see the UFO tower and the Church of Coronation and the castle and the beautiful rooftops of Bratislava, the Michael's Gate, and of course the town square, where I just had my lunch just a few minutes ago in one of those wonderful outdoor cafes. Bratislava is just magnificently beautiful, and today was just a perfect letter day. A red letter day. 71 degrees, no cloud in the skies, sun is shining. Great day in Slovakia.
Our next stop, Vienna, Austria, home to Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, and Strauss, and the imperial capital of the Habsburg Austrian Empire for centuries. Here we are in the heart of the city at the Hofburg Palace, from which Maria Theresa and Franz Josef once ruled. Today it's the seat of the national government and houses the National Library and many fine museums, and it's just a short stroll to Vienna's St. Stephen's Cathedral. This is Vienna's Grand Cathedral and city center, its own St. Stephen's Cathedral, where Mozart was married. Built in the 13 to 1400s, it's a wonderful example of true Gothic architecture. We toured this lovely church and also ascended the great tower on top.
Okay, we're on the very top of St. Stephen's Tower, the steeple right here in this wonderful medieval church, overlooking Vienna. That's okay. Whoop.
Just behind and below Stephanplatz, as it is called by Austrians, is a section where several artists and composers lived, including Mozart. I did have a chance to tour the apartment where Mozart and his wife lived. It was quite exciting to sit in the same spot where he composed his excellent music, and look out the very same window.
Here's the giant bell. Wonderful ruined palace in Vienna, Austria. Habsburg Empire. Just finished touring probably 45 rooms of the several hundred rooms that are in here. To get how many exactly. We're going to come back here tonight for a wonderful Mozart concert inside the palace. Again, a beautiful day in Vienna. Probably 72 degrees. Clear blue skies, and a wonderful tour. It just about lasted an hour and a half throughout this entire beautiful facility. Absolutely gorgeous. This was the palace of Maria Theresa, who was the mother of Marie Antoinette.
Bev Jansema and I did return to Schönbrunn Palace that night, along with fellow EF tour member Abby Stokes, to enjoy a wonderful Mozart concert by the Schloss Schönbrunn Symphony Orchestra in the beautiful Great Gallery where Mozart himself performed for the Austrian Emperor. What a great evening. With a totally different feel and near the old city, this is the somewhat radical Hunterwasser House, designed by painter, architect, and professor Friedensreich Hunterwasser. It was built in 1985 to reflect a modern art approach to building, along with being environmentally friendly. It's quite colorful and is known for its crooked walls, numerous balconies and terraces, and many plants and trees that grow out of it and on top. This is actually an apartment building. He was pro-diversity and even thought of his tree tenants as being as important as his human tenants. And even the floors and the sidewalks are irregular to, in his words, stimulate the brain.
So this is the famous Kartnerstrasse in Austria, in Vienna. And this very sad but beautiful monument was built in memory of those thousands of individuals who died in the bubonic plague. It was actually built by them, and so it's being protected and cared for to this day. We yesterday went down to the catacombs beneath the street and saw the bones of thousands of those victims that you can actually still see to this very day. Very sad, but again a very beautiful monument in honor of those who died during the bubonic plague.
We've now just entered the Hofburg Palace complex to enjoy several of Vienna's finest museums and artifacts, like the world's oldest Venus. I'm with my humanities colleague, Carolyn Johnson, and Jordan, her daughter, and our first stop is the Museum of Natural History and Archaeology to see the famous Venus von Willendorf that's discussed in our classes. This is said to be the oldest Venus statue or statuette that we're aware of in the world. It certainly shows how the ideal of femininity has changed significantly over time. And from there, I meandered a few buildings over to the Austrian National Library, another goal I had set for myself while here in Vienna. This beautiful State Hall was built in 1730 in lavish Baroque style. It houses the archives and contains 2.2 million handwritten and printed manuscripts. As a self-confessed bibliophiliac, that is, one who loves books, I found myself to be in book heaven. Not many were here when I visited, and so I took my time among the hushed whispers. This has got to be one of the most beautiful libraries in the entire world. Both the statue in the very center and the lovely fresco on the ceiling are of Charles VI, the Habsburg who commissioned this building. I also saw several Greek manuscripts, scientific and biblical. Hebrew manuscripts that were handwritten, and some Latin codices, including this early handwritten Gospel of Barnabas. And many beautiful illuminated manuscripts as well, dating back to the early Middle Ages. They were absolutely stunning. Another building that's part of the Austrian National Library houses this very unique globe museum. It's the only one of its kind around the world and has both celestial and terrestrial globes. That is to say, globes of the skies, space, and stars, as well as globes of the Earth. These span over 5 centuries. There are actually over 640 objects in this museum, including many scientific instruments. I learned a few things here about the history of globes, how they're made, and how they've been used across time and also across culture. And the setting for this as well is the very ornate and artistic Hofburg Palace complex, with amazing art surrounding you. You can't tell it here, but these two globes are taller than I am. They're about 6 feet tall. But my favorite building is this amazing library that houses the Papyrus Museum. It owns 180,000 papyrus texts. It shows how papyrus was made and displays 200 texts or fragments that deal with medicine, magic, music, and theology. It also contains some parchments and some ostraca, or clay vessels like this one with the Greek text of Orestes on top. From the Book of the Dead that dates back to the 2nd millennium BC to Islamic texts of the 13th century AD, it also has one of the oldest Gospels of Luke dating back to the AD 500s. This fragment contains the 2nd chapter of Luke, or Nativity text.
Here we are in Prague in the Czech Republic, and this is my 50th country. It's 5-0, and here's the great clock tower.
Chci povedala, že úrovně se tvářím za někam.
This city is so alive with music, culture, and people who embrace their history. Vicky, our tour director, led us to Old Town Gate to give us a brief lesson on Prague's architecture and orient us to the various sites we might wish to explore on our own. She explained how Prague attained the height of its glory in the Middle Ages during the Holy Roman Empire. Charles IV chose Prague as the imperial residence and set out to make Prague the most magnificent city in Europe. Fellow travelers Mike Peterson and Bev Jansma joined me in finding the historic Bethlehem Chapel, birthplace of the Reformation in Bohemia under reformer John Huss back in the 15th century. We passed several cafes along the way before meandering through several side streets to reach our destination of Bethlehem Chapel.
We're inside the Bethlehem Chapel in Prague, Czech Republic, and this was the site of the Reformation in Bohemia under reformer John Huss, or as they say it, Jan Hus, who preached here for quite a few years and ultimately was burned at the stake for his Reformation preaching. This church is quite simple and plain compared to most of the cathedrals that we've seen so far in Europe, but was quite a hub of theological debate and Reformation during that time period. And you can see the pulpit from which John Huss preached. Still here today. Now, the church was founded in 1391. Huss preached here until the year 1412. But in the box you see here alongside of the wall, Sophia, the wife of King Wenceslas, would come to listen and to observe services.
This is the pulpit of John Huss. Prague's history reaches back over 1,000 years to the last third of the 9th century. Czech states were gradually unified and became part of Christian Europe. The first Christians were the Premysl family who built Prague Castle. Here we are at the famous castle on the hill overlooking Old Town. We've gotten here just in time for changing of the guard. You'll need to look carefully as each guard salutes and exchanges places. In 1230, the Czech king Wenceslas I fortified the area. It was first in the Moravian Empire, then Bohemia, then part of the Austrian Empire. The democracy of Czechoslovakia lasted from 1918 until communism took over in 1948. And on the 1st of January of 1993, Czechoslovakia divided peacefully into two countries, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. This fortress is the seat of today's Czech government. From Castle Hill, we had a great view of Old Town and its many landmarks nestled within the fabric of these classic village houses. We could even see Prague's version of the Eiffel Tower on a neighboring hill. And then down below, Charles Bridge, the Clock Tower, and Church of St. Nicholas. In the very center of Prague Castle is the huge Gothic structure of St. Vitus Cathedral, begun in the year 1344. It took several centuries to build and was finally completed by 19th and 20th century architects and artists. The cathedral houses the crown jewels and tomb of good King Wenceslas. Good King Wenceslas I was actually the Duke of Bohemia from 921 until Bronislav the Cruel assassinated him in 935. Known for his heroic goodness and now also a martyr, he was revered highly by all. As a result, he became elevated to sainthood, declared king posthumously, and today is the Czech patron saint. He is the subject of the now famous Christmas carol written in 1853, 9 centuries later. Our guided tour of this great church took us through the west portal to see some of the best elements of Gothic, Neo-Gothic, and modern style. We strolled past several side chapels to catch a glimpse of sacred artifacts, saintly relics, and Renaissance paintings. And of course, we took time to gaze at the richly decorated and jewel-encrusted St. Wenceslas Chapel that houses his tomb.
King Wenceslas, isn't that amazing? Good King Wenceslas. Yeah, that song will have new meaning to me now. Amazing. Alright, so this is called the Golden Lane in Prague, just outside the palace door.
Our friend Dr. Brad Call led the way to Charles Bridge.
Here we're walking across St. Charles Bridge. We just left the palace, heading to the old town. All these statues are of famous saints and bishops, including St. Nicholas, Wenceslas, St. Augustine, and others. Beautiful view of the river and of the palace behind with St. Vitus Church, where Wenceslas is buried. A little rain, but a beautiful day in the beautiful city of Prague.
Of course, Jared and I made sure to ascend the Town Hall Clock Tower for the best panoramic view of the city. We are about 228 feet above the city and have an excellent view of Castle Hill, St. Nicholas Church, many of the Baroque and Renaissance buildings that surround the courtyard, the statue of John Huss on the site he was executed, and the lovely park below, numerous cafes, lovely Rococo facades, and the new city in the background. Tonight, Mike and I are going with Carolyn and Jordan to see Mozart's opera Don Giovanni in the elegant Estates Theater, where Mozart himself conducted its world debut on October 29th in the year 1787. And the following night, we're headed to the National Marionette Theater to see Don Giovanni again, in the somewhat humorous form, and we'll stop in the Jazz Club to get a taste of modern Prague before heading to our next destination. And here we are at Estates Theater, enjoying the full opera of Don Giovanni, and only a few feet away from where Mozart himself conducted the premiere. And tomorrow night, we'll see a Mozart marionette conduct the show, and then take in the Jazz Club before heading to Germany.
The Marienplatz in Munich, standing in front of the Glockenspiel, and the show will start shortly. So are you a statue or for real? You're welcome.
Nymph Castle, or Schloss Nymphenburg, is a Baroque palace here in Munich, built in 1675. It was the main summer abode of the rulers of Bavaria, such as Maximilian during the Holy Roman Empire. Mad Ludwig II was born in Nymphenburg Palace, and would later reign as the monarch of Bavaria in Munich, but later built an amazing palace in the German Alps. That palace is called Neuschwanstein. Ludwig sought to avoid contact with people, and chose to live in a fantasy world all his own. In his mind, he was a medieval king with sovereign power and surrounded by knights. This castle was his escape, and was filled with murals depicting the operas of his very close friend and associate, Richard Wagner. Sadly, his time in this castle was short, and just a few weeks after his death, it was opened for all to see. It's the most visited castle in Europe today, and said to be the most elegant castle in all the world. He had the castle built high on this hill in the Alps overlooking the valley below, not for defensive purposes, but to keep him far away and above his subjects. The best view of this Romanesque revival fairy tale castle is from Mary's Bridge, high above the Polak Gorge and waterfalls, which Ludwig chose as part of the context. Since 1886, 60 million people have visited Neuschwanstein. At the current time, 1.3 million visit each year, and 6,000 every day from June to August. There were so many this day on the narrow wooden bridge that I must admit I did feel somewhat tenuous. Bev and Jared were a lot more brave than I. In retrospect, the experience caused reflection on some of the darker days of Germany's history and the changing political landscape. But darker sights were yet to come. We're standing at the east-west German village of Müdleroth, Germany, which is known as Little Berlin, because it too was divided by a wall cutting right through its middle for more than 4 decades. 23 people lived in the east and 27 in the west. We're standing on the west side looking toward the east side. Soldiers on the west side simply monitored the wall, but those on the east heavily guarded it. The west side was ruled by NATO and the east by the Soviet-led military alliance. The Iron Curtain and the border dividing East and West Germany ran along the Tann, a stream which flows through this village and which to this day marks the boundary between the states of Bavaria and Thuringia. Family and friends were not even allowed to wave at each other for fear of being shot. Initially, the border was just a wooden fence, but it soon grew barbed wire, and finally in 1966, the communist authorities turned it into a concrete wall which stood for 23 years. The wall finally came down in 1989, but this section stands as a lasting memorial. A very sad chapter in Germany's history. And yet an even sadder chapter occurred just prior to all of this in Germany as well.
This is a very sad concentration camp at Dachau in Germany, where from 1933 to 1945 over 200,000 were imprisoned and over 41,000 were killed. See the barracks that are still standing, and the guard tower, and in the back the crematorium and the showers. Many of the barracks are no longer here.
A more peaceful time exists now for Germany, and nowhere is that more clear than here in Berlin. Even though we did see some lasting marks of the Third Reich, Holocaust Memorial, Berlin Wall sections, and Checkpoint Charlie, our time in Berlin revealed a peace-loving and unified city going through a period of rebuilding and reinvention. From the Brandenburg Gate to the new Parliament to the World Time Clock and TV Tower, we saw a new vision built on a more classic past. And that classic past will always be a part of Germany's heritage, one that still appreciates and celebrates the glories of other civilizations.
The city center in Berlin, Museum Island.
The Egyptian Museum owns one of the world's most important collections of ancient Egyptian art, although most of its pieces come from the time of King Akhenaten around 1340 BC, and the location known today as Tel El Amarna, the capital of Egypt at that time. Akhenaten was the father of King Tut and husband of Queen Nefertiti. He changed the worldview of Egypt briefly from polytheism to monotheism. We saw many amazing statues, reliefs, paintings, and several famous Tel El Amarna letters and other papyri documents. Among my favorites were the deep blue tomb ceiling frescoes and portraits of the royal family and members of the royal court. But of course the most famous artifact here, and the one we enjoyed most, was the magnificent bust of Queen Nefertiti. The color has not been restored since the Amarna period, yet she still imbibes the ideals of Egyptian beauty. Another of the most popular attractions in Berlin, the Pergamon Museum, right next door, is also world famous for its archaeological holdings. Here we're lingering and gazing at the remarkable 2nd century BC Pergamon altar, considered a Hellenistic masterpiece. The amazing frieze depicts a battle between the gods and the giants. Pergamon is referred to in Revelation 2:12-17, a text known as Christ's letters to the 7 churches of Asia Minor through John the Apostle, and Pergamon was the site of one of these. Many believe this polytheistic altar was what St. John referred to as Satan's throne. It is 118 feet wide, 108 feet tall, with a stairway being 65 feet wide. Excavated by Karl Humann in 1878 and brought to Germany in 1901. This model gives you an idea of what the entire altar looked like back in the day. And the building housing it now was built in 1930. This market gate of Miletus, also 2nd century BC, shows an important example of Greco-Roman architecture, combining the Roman arch with the Greek-styled Corinthian columns above and Ionic columns below. St. Paul visited here as recorded in Acts chapter 20. And this is the amazing bright blue glazed brick Ishtar Gate of Babylon from the 6th century BC, and built by Nebuchadnezzar, once listed among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It's referred to in Daniel 4:30 and was the major entrance into the city during the days of Jewish captivity. The gate is ornate with dragons, lions, and bulls, symbolizing the major gods of Babylon. We had time for one more look at Berlin's great landmark, the Brandenburg Gate, before heading to our final destination of Poland.
Well, believe it or not, we're in Poland. Sketching. Both the new and the old.
We ended our Central and Eastern European tour here at the Baltic seaport town of Szczecin, Poland. My favorite site here was Castle Hill and the Pomeranian Duke's Castle, an ancient settlement site since the turn of the 7th and 8th centuries. In the 12th century, the hill featured a wooden residence of the Szczecin rulers of the Gryfics dynasty and a pagan shrine called the Goncia. This stone castle we're seeing began in 1340 during the rule of Duke Barnon III. The first buildings were the stone house and knight's hall, and the cloisters were filled with couriers, court artists, and artisans. A new wing, built in 1616, houses the Ducal Museum and Crypt, with the meticulously preserved tin sarcophagi of Pomeranian dukes. These buildings did in fact sustain heavy damage during World War II, as did much of this city. but as we could see, they have now since been restored beautifully. And with our last great meal of pierogies and jurek soup, we bade our new European friends and fellow travelers farewell, remembering the great times we shared together.